The dusty train platform in Trinity, Texas, stretched empty under the brutal August sun of 1882, and Willa Harrison stood there like a monument to hope that had long since turned to ash, her eyes fixed on the horizon where the rails disappeared into wavering heat mirages. She had been waiting for 3 years, 2 months and 17 days. Every Tuesday and Friday when the train came through, Willa would put on her best calico dress, the blue one with tiny white flowers that Thomas had always loved, and she would stand on that platform with her carpetbag packed, ready to leave Trinity behind forever. The other townsfolk had stopped asking why she kept coming. They knew the story, knew about Thomas Garrett, who had ridden out in the summer of 1879 promising to return with enough money to marry her properly, to give her the life she deserved. He had talked of cattle drives and opportunities in Wyoming, his eyes bright with dreams and his hands warm as they held hers one last time. The station master, old Henry Perkins, did not even look at her anymore. He just went about his business, unloading mail and freight, occasionally glancing at Willa with something between pity and exasperation. She knew what people said about her in town. Crazy Willa Harrison, the woman who could not let go. The fool still waiting for a man who was probably dead in a ditch somewhere, or married to some saloon girl in Cheyenne, or simply smart enough to realize Trinity had nothing to offer him. But Willa kept waiting because she had promised. The last thing Thomas had said to her was, "Wait for me." And she was a woman of her word, even if he had not been a man of his. The train whistle split the afternoon air, and Willa straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the skirt that had been mended so many times it was more thread than original fabric. The locomotive pulled into the station with a great hissing of steam and squealing of brakes, and passengers began to disembark. A merchant and his wife, 3 cowboys looking for work, an older woman clutching a child's hand. No Thomas. Willa felt the familiar ache settle in her chest, the weight of disappointment that never seemed to get lighter no matter how many times she carried it. She turned to go, to walk the dusty mile back to the boarding house where she worked, when a voice stopped her. "Excuse me, miss." She turned and found herself looking at a man who was not Thomas. He was tall, with sun-weathered skin and eyes the color of storm clouds. His hat was worn but well cared for, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had seen hard things and survived them. Dust covered his clothes, and there was a weariness to him that seemed to go bone deep. "I am sorry to bother you," he said, removing his hat. Dark hair fell across his forehead, and Willa could see a scar running along his jaw. "But you look like someone who knows this town." "I am looking for work, and maybe a room if one can be had." Willa studied him for a long moment. She had become good at reading people in her years of waiting, good at spotting the drifters and the troublemakers, the honest men and the liars. This man looked honest if tired. "The boarding house on Main Street usually has rooms," she said quietly. "Mrs. Peterson, who runs it, is fair, though her cooking leaves something to be desired. As for work, you might try the Turner Ranch about 5 miles north of town. They are always looking for hands." The man nodded but did not move to leave. Instead, he looked at her with an expression that was difficult to name. Not pity exactly, something gentler than that. "Forgive me for saying so, miss, but you look like someone who has been waiting a long time for something." Willa stiffened. "I do not see how that is any concern of yours, mister." "It is not," he agreed. "But I have seen that look before. On soldiers waiting for relief that never came, on women in saloons waiting for men who promised to take them away from that life, on children waiting for parents who rode off and never came back." He paused, turning his hat in his hands. "Whatever you are waiting for, I hope it comes. But if it does not, I hope you do not wait forever." Before Willa could respond, he put his hat back on, tipped it to her, and walked away toward town. She stood there watching him go, anger and something else warring in her chest. How dare he presume to know anything about her situation? How dare he offer her platitudes and false wisdom? But as she walked home, his words followed her like shadows. The boarding house was a two-story structure that had seen better days, its white paint peeling and its porch sagging slightly on the left side. Willa had lived there for 5 years, ever since her father died and left her with nothing but debts. She worked for Mrs. Peterson in exchange for her room and a small wage, cooking meals for the boarders, changing linens, and keeping the place as clean as possible despite the constant influx of dust that was simply a fact of life in Trinity. When she entered through the kitchen door, Mrs. Peterson was already there, rolling out pie dough with aggressive efficiency. She was a large woman with iron-gray hair pulled back in a severe bun and a personality to match her appearance. But she had been kind to Willa when kindness was scarce, and Willa was grateful for that. "Any luck today?" Mrs. Peterson asked without looking up. "No, madam. Willa, child, you have got to stop doing this to yourself. It has been 3 years. I know how long it has been." Willa tied on her apron and began preparing vegetables for the evening meal. "And I will stop when I am ready to stop." Mrs. Peterson sighed but said nothing more. They had had this conversation too many times for it to lead anywhere new. That evening, as Willa was serving dinner to the boarders, she was surprised to see the stranger from the train station seated at the table. He had cleaned up some, though the dust of the road still clung to him in places. When she set his plate down, he looked up and gave her a small nod of recognition. "Thank you for the recommendation, miss. Mrs. Peterson was kind enough to have a room available." "It is Willa," she said. "Willa Harrison." "Warren Morrison," he replied. "Pleased to make your acquaintance properly." She nodded and moved on to serve the other boarders, but she felt his eyes on her throughout the meal. It was not an uncomfortable feeling exactly, more like being seen by someone who actually looked. After dinner, as she was washing dishes, Mrs. Peterson came into the kitchen with a knowing expression on her face. "That Morrison fellow seems like a decent sort," she said, drying a plate with more attention than necessary. "I suppose. Asked about you." Willa's hand stilled in the dishwater. "What did he ask?" "Whether you were courting anyone. I told him the truth, that you are spoken for in your heart if not in fact." "Mrs. Peterson." "Well, it is the truth, is it not? You are as good as married to a ghost, Willa. That boy is never coming back." The words hit harder than they should have, maybe because Willa was starting to suspect the same thing herself. But admitting it felt like betrayal, like giving up on the one good thing that had ever happened to her. "Thomas will come back," she said quietly. "He promised." "Men promise lots of things, child. The good ones keep those promises. The rest just move on." Willa did not respond. She could not. Warren Morrison stayed at the boarding house and found work at the Turner Ranch, just as Willa had suggested. He was gone most days, riding out before dawn and returning after sunset, but Willa saw him at breakfast and dinner. He was quiet, polite, and seemed to have a way with the other boarders. Even old Mr. Hutchins, who complained about everything, had nothing bad to say about Warren. And Warren watched Willa, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but with a steady attention that suggested he saw more than most people cared to look for. He noticed when she burned her hand on a pot handle and said nothing but left a jar of salve by the kitchen door. He noticed when she was tired and took his own dishes to the kitchen without being asked. He noticed when she came back from the train station with that particular droop to her shoulders and sat on the porch playing his harmonica, the soft, melancholy tunes somehow making her feel less alone. Weeks passed, and summer began its slow fade into autumn. The heat remained, but the quality of the light changed, becoming softer, more golden. Willa continued her vigil at the train station, and Warren never commented on it, never asked questions she did not want to answer. Then came a Tuesday in late September when everything changed. Willa stood on the platform as usual, watching the passengers disembark. A rancher she recognized, two young women who looked like they might be teachers, a salesman with a heavy case. And then, stepping down from the last car, a man in a fine suit with slicked back hair and a gold watch chain glinting in the sun. He looked around the platform with an expression of vague distaste until his eyes landed on Willa. Then his face lit up with recognition and something that might have been calculation. Willa Harrison. My God, is that really you? Willa stared at him, her mind struggling to connect this polished stranger with the rough cowboy who had left 3 years ago. Thomas. He strode over to her, arms outstretched, but Willa stepped back. Something was wrong. Everything about this felt wrong. I know, Thomas said, lowering his arms. I look different. I have done well for myself, Willa, better than I ever dreamed. And I have come back for you just like I promised. 3 years, Willa said, her voice hollow. You have been gone for 3 years, Thomas. No letters, no word, nothing. I was busy building a future for us. I have a ranch now, Willa. 2,000 acres in Montana. Cattle, horses, everything. And I want you to come back with me as my wife. It was everything she had waited for, everything she had stood on this platform dreaming about. So why did it feel like ashes in her mouth? You could have written. I did right. I sent letters to the general store. Did you not get them? Willa shook her head. She had checked at the store every week for the first year. There had been no letters. Thomas frowned. Well, that is unfortunate, but it does not matter now. I am here. We can be married tomorrow and leave on the next train. Come on, Willa. This is what we planned. She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a stranger wearing Thomas Garrett's face. Or maybe this had always been who he was, and she had been too young and foolish to see it. There was no warmth in his eyes, no real affection, just the satisfaction of a man who had accomplished a task. I need time to think. Think? Thomas's expression hardened. What is there to think about? I came all this way for you. And I waited all this time for you, Willa shot back, feeling anger kindle in her chest. So you can give me a few days to make a decision about the rest of my life. She turned and walked away, leaving Thomas standing on the platform looking bewildered and annoyed. Her hands were shaking, her heart pounding. She had dreamed of this moment for so long, but in her dreams it had felt different. Right. This felt like being trapped. When she got back to the boarding house, Warren was on the porch fixing a loose board. He looked up as she approached, and something in her face made him set down his hammer and stand. What happened? He came back. The words felt strange in her mouth. Thomas came back. Warren went very still. I see. After 3 years of nothing, he just showed up expecting me to leave with him tomorrow. Willa sank down onto the porch steps, suddenly exhausted. I should be happy. This is what I have been waiting for. Warren sat down beside her, not too close, but close enough that she could feel the solid warmth of his presence. But you are not happy. I do not know what I am. She looked at her hands, at the calluses and burned scars from years of work. He is not the man I remember. Or maybe I am not the woman he left behind. Everything feels wrong. What does your heart say? My heart has been saying the same thing for 3 years. Wait for Thomas. He will come back, he promised. Willa laughed, but there was no humor in it. I am very good at waiting. Not so good at knowing what to do when the waiting is over. Warren was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, I waited once, for a woman I loved. I was off fighting in the Indian Wars, and she was back home in Kansas. She wrote me beautiful letters about the life we would have when I came back. The farm we would build, the children we would raise. I carried those letters with me through every battle, every march. They kept me alive. What happened? When I finally made it home, I found out she had married someone else 6 months after I left. Said she could not wait anymore, could not live with the uncertainty. He looked out at the street, at the dust swirling in small eddies. I was angry for a long time, felt betrayed, but eventually I realized that people change, circumstances change. The future we imagine is not always the future we get. How did you move on? I kept living, kept moving forward. And I learned that love is not just about promises and waiting. It is about showing up every day, about seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway. About building something together instead of just dreaming about it. Willa turned to look at him. In the fading afternoon light, his face was all plains and shadows, but his eyes were steady and clear. Is that why you stopped me on the train platform that day? Because you saw someone who needed to hear that, maybe. A small smile tugged at his mouth. Or maybe I saw a woman worth knowing and I was looking for an excuse to talk to her. Her breath caught. Warren, I am not asking you for anything, Willa. You have got a decision to make, and you should make it based on what you want, not what you think you owe to a promise made 3 years ago. He stood up, picking up his hammer. But I want you to know that if you decide Thomas is not what you want anymore, that does not make you a bad person. It makes you human. He went inside, leaving Willa alone with her thoughts and the dying light. That night she lay in her narrow bed and stared at the ceiling, her mind churning. Thomas had come back. After all this time, after all the waiting, he had actually come back. She should be packing her things, preparing for the new life in Montana that she had dreamed about for so long. But when she closed her eyes, she did not see Thomas's face. She saw Warren, steady and patient, sitting beside her on the porch. She saw his small kindnesses, the way he played his harmonica on hard nights, the way he looked at her like she was worth seeing. The next morning, Thomas showed up at the boarding house dressed in his finest clothes, ready to sweep Willa away to the preacher. She met him on the porch, very aware of Warren eating breakfast inside, of Mrs. Peterson bustling around the kitchen, of her whole life in Trinity watching and waiting to see what she would do. I cannot go with you, Thomas. He stared at her like she had spoken a foreign language. What do you mean you cannot go with me? We have an agreement. I came back for you. You came back 3 years too late. The words came easier than she expected. I waited for you, Thomas. God knows I waited, but the woman you left behind does not exist anymore. And I do not think the man I was waiting for exists either. This is ridiculous. I have money now, Willa, a real future. What do you have here? A job cleaning other people's messes in a boarding house. The contempt in his voice sparked anger in her chest. I have a life here. People who see me every day, who value what I do, that is more than I would have with you. Is there someone else? His eyes narrowed. Is that what this is about? Willa thought about Warren, about the quiet strength of him, about the way he made her feel seen. This is about me realizing that I deserve better than someone who would leave me waiting for 3 years without a word. You say you sent letters. Maybe you did. Maybe you did not. But if you really wanted to be with me, you would have found a way to let me know you were alive and thinking of me. I cannot believe this. Thomas shook his head. I traveled all this way and you are throwing it back in my face for what? Some fantasy about deserving better, not a fantasy. A fact. Willa stood straighter, feeling certainty settle over her like a cloak. I am sorry you made the trip for nothing, Thomas, but I am not going to marry you, not tomorrow. Not ever. She turned and walked back into the boarding house, leaving Thomas sputtering on the porch. Her hands were shaking again, but this time it was not from fear or confusion. It was from the sheer relief of finally letting go. Mrs. Peterson was standing in the hallway, making no pretense of not having listened to every word. "Well, it is about time. I think I need to lie down. I think you need to talk to Warren Morrison." Willa looked at her in surprise. "What?" "That boy has been sitting in the dining room for the past 20 minutes pretending to read a newspaper, but really waiting to see if you need him to throw Thomas Garrett out on his ear." Mrs. Peterson smiled. "I may be old, but I am not blind. He looks at you like you hung the moon, child. And you look at him the same way when you think nobody is watching. I do not know what you are talking about." "Yes, you do. Now stop being stubborn and go talk to him before I do it for you." Willa found Warren exactly where Mrs. Peterson said he would be, newspaper in hand, eyes fixed on the doorway. When she entered, he stood up so fast he nearly knocked over his chair. "Are you all right?" I told him no. The words came out in a rush. "I told Thomas I was not going with him, that I was not going to marry him." Something flickered across Warren's face. Hope, maybe, or relief. "How do you feel?" "Terrified. Free. Like I just jumped off a cliff and I do not know if I am going to fly or fall." She crossed the room to stand in front of him. "You said love is about showing up every day. About seeing someone clearly and choosing them anyway." "I did say that." "Well, I see you, Warren Morrison. I see how kind you are, how patient. I see the way you fix the porch without being asked, and how you leave salve for my burns, and how you play your harmonica when you think I need the comfort of music." Her voice was shaking now, but she pushed on. "And I want to choose you if you will have me. Not because I am running from Thomas, but because when I think about the future now, I see you in it." Warren reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, and cupped her face in his calloused hands. "I have been hoping you would say something like that since the first day I saw you on that platform. You looked so sad and so strong at the same time, and I thought, that is a woman worth waiting for." "I am done with waiting," Willa whispered. "I want to start living." He kissed her then, soft and sweet, and it felt nothing like the kisses she remembered with Thomas. This felt like coming home, like finding something she had not even known she was looking for. When they finally pulled apart, Warren was smiling. Really smiling, not the small, careful expressions she had seen before. "So what happens now? I have no idea," Willa admitted. "I have spent 3 years planning for a future with Thomas. I do not have any plans for this." "Good. We can make them together." Over the next few months, they did exactly that. Warren continued working at the Turner Ranch, and Willa kept her job at the boarding house, but they spent every spare moment together. He taught her to ride properly, taking her out to the open country beyond Trinity where the grass stretched golden to the horizon. She taught him to make a proper pie, laughing at his attempts to crimp the crust. They talked for hours on the boarding house porch, sharing stories of their pasts, their dreams, their fears. The town gossips had a field day, of course. Willa Harrison, who had waited so faithfully for Thomas Garrett, had thrown him over for some drifter cowboy within days of his return. The scandal was delicious and people talked about it for weeks, but Willa found she did not care. Let them talk. She was happy for the first time in years. Thomas left Trinity on the next train, bitter and resentful. Willa heard later that he had married a widow in Montana within 3 months, a woman with property and connections. It confirmed what she had suspected, that his proposal had been more about convenience than love. He had needed a wife, and she had been the easiest option because she had been waiting. But she was not waiting anymore. In December, Warren asked her to marry him properly. He did it on the train platform, which made her laugh and cry at the same time. "I figured this place owed you something good," he said, down on one knee in the same spot where she had stood for so many Tuesdays and Fridays. "You spent 3 years here waiting for the wrong man. I want you to have a new memory of this place, the memory of saying yes to the right one." She said yes. They were married in the Trinity Church on a cold January day in 1883, with Mrs. Peterson weeping happily in the front pew and half the town in attendance. It was not a fancy wedding. Willa wore a simple dress that Mrs. Peterson had helped her sew, and Warren wore his best suit with his hair slicked back. But when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, and Warren kissed her in front of God and everyone, Willa felt like the richest woman in Texas. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a place with 2 rooms and a porch that sagged slightly on one side. Warren fixed up the porch and added a 3rd room, talking about the children they would have someday. He had saved enough money from his work at the Turner Ranch to buy a small piece of land, and he had plans to start his own horse breeding operation. Willa kept working at the boarding house for a while, but her heart was not in it anymore. She wanted to build something with Warren, wanted to be part of his dreams instead of just serving meals to strangers. So when Mr. Turner offered Warren a partnership in a new venture, breeding horses for the Army, they took the leap together. It was hard work, harder than anything Willa had done before. Breaking horses, managing the breeding program, dealing with Army contracts and difficult customers. But it was their work, built by their hands and their choices. And at the end of each day, no matter how tired they were, they had each other. Their first child came in the spring of 1884, a boy they named William, born with a full head of dark hair and his father's storm-gray eyes. Willa had been terrified of childbirth, but Warren had held her hand through the whole ordeal, and when she finally held William in her arms, she understood what it meant to be completely happy. Warren was a good father, patient and kind, the same way he was with the horses. He would sit up with William at night when the baby was fussy, walking the floor and humming the same melancholy tunes he used to play on his harmonica. Willa would watch them from the bed, her heart so full it ached. They had a daughter 2 years later, Catherine, who came into the world screaming and did not seem to stop for the first 6 months. She was a handful from the start, willful and wild, but Warren adored her. "She gets that stubborn streak from you," he would tell Willa with a grin, and Willa could not even argue because it was true. The horse breeding business grew slowly but steadily. Warren had an eye for good bloodlines, and word spread that Morrison horses were reliable, strong, and well-trained. They hired a few ranch hands, young men looking for honest work, and the small piece of land grew into a proper ranch. Willa sometimes thought about those years she had spent waiting on the train platform, and it felt like remembering someone else's life. That sad, stubborn girl seemed like a stranger now. She had been so convinced that happiness could only come from one specific future, one specific person. She had never imagined that life could surprise you with something better than what you planned. One evening when William was 5 and Catherine was 3, Warren came home from a trip to town with an odd expression on his face. They put the children to bed, and then he sat Willa down at the kitchen table. "I saw Thomas Garrett today." Willa felt her stomach clench. "What?" "He was passing through Trinity on his way to somewhere else. We talked for a bit." Warren took her hand. "He is divorced. The marriage did not work out. He seemed bitter about it, about a lot of things. Kept talking about how nothing turned out the way he planned." "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I wanted you to hear it from me, not from town gossip, and because I wanted to tell you what I said to him." Warren's eyes were steady on hers. "He asked if I was the reason you did not marry him. I told him no. I told him you did not marry him because you were smart enough to know the difference between a promise and a commitment, between waiting for something and building something." "What did he say?" "Nothing much. Just walked away." Warren squeezed her hand. But it made me think about how different our lives could have been. If you had said yes to him, if I had never stopped you on that train platform. Do not. Willa leaned forward and kissed him softly. Do not think about the what-ifs. We are here. We are happy. That is all that matters. I know. But sometimes I still cannot believe how lucky I am, that I found you waiting on that platform, that you let me into your life. You did not just walk into my life, Warren. You showed me what my life could be. You showed me that I did not have to wait for happiness. I could choose it. He pulled her close, and they sat there in the quiet kitchen, holding each other as the lamplight flickered and the children slept peacefully in the next room. Outside, the Texas night was full of stars and the distant sound of horses moving in their corral. The years passed, marked by the changing seasons and the growing children. William grew tall and serious, with a gift for working with horses that matched his father's. Catherine remained wild and willful, but she had a good heart and a fierce loyalty to her family. They had another child in 1888, a boy they named James, who was quiet and thoughtful, always watching the world with curious eyes. The ranch prospered. Warren's reputation as a horse breeder spread beyond Texas, and they started getting orders from ranches as far away as California and Colorado. They built a bigger house, with enough rooms for all the children and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch the sun go down. Willa learned to love the ranch life, though it was nothing like what she had imagined all those years ago waiting for Thomas. This life was harder, messier, more real. There were droughts and difficult births, sick animals and tight finances. But there was also laughter around the dinner table, and lazy Sunday afternoons, and the solid comfort of Warren's presence beside her every night. She became part of the Trinity community in a way she never had been before. People respected her now, not as the crazy girl who waited for a man who never came, but as Warren Morrison's wife, a woman who worked hard and raised good children. She served on the church committee and helped organize the town's annual harvest festival. She had friends, real friends, women who came over for coffee and shared their own stories of struggle and survival. Mrs. Peterson remained a fixture in their lives until she passed away peacefully in her sleep in 1891. She left the boarding house to Willa in her will, which was a shock to everyone, including Willa. They sold it to a young couple from Dallas who wanted to try their luck in Trinity, and used the money to expand the ranch and buy more breeding stock. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Warren took Willa back to the train platform. It was a Tuesday, the same day of the week when she used to wait for Thomas, and for a moment, Willa felt the ghost of that old pain. But then Warren put his arms around her from behind, and she leaned back against him, and the pain faded into something distant and unimportant. "Do you ever regret it?" Warren asked quietly. "Saying no to him, choosing this life instead of the one you planned." Willa turned in his arms to face him. There was silver in his hair now and lines around his eyes from years of squinting into the sun. He was even more handsome than he had been that first day on the platform, worn in the way good leather wears, softened and strengthened by time. Not for a single second. That girl who waited here, she did not know what she really wanted. She thought she wanted grand promises and romantic dreams. But what she needed was someone who would show up every single day and choose her over and over again. She touched his face, feeling the familiar roughness of his jaw. "You gave me that. You give me that every day. It is not hard to choose you, Willa. It is the easiest thing I have ever done." They kissed there on the platform, in full view of anyone who cared to watch, and Willa felt the rightness of it settle into her bones. This was where her new life had started. Not when Thomas came back, but when Warren had first spoken to her, had first seen her clearly and offered her a different way forward. As they walked back to the wagon, Warren's hand warm in hers, Willa thought about all the years she had wasted waiting for the wrong thing. But she could not truly regret them, because they had led her here, to this man, to this life. Sometimes the wrong path teaches you how to recognize the right one when it finally appears. The children grew and changed. William fell in love with a rancher's daughter from the neighboring county, a sensible girl named Margaret who knew her way around horses and was not afraid of hard work. They married when William was 22, and Warren gave them a portion of the ranch to build their own place. Catherine, true to her wild nature, announced at 17 that she wanted to go to teachers' college in Houston. Willa had been horrified at first, the idea of her daughter so far away, but Warren had supported Catherine's decision. "Let her spread her wings," he said. "She will come back to us." And he had been right. Catherine finished her education and returned to Trinity, where she taught at the local school and eventually married the new doctor who came to town, a kind man who appreciated her fierce spirit. James, their youngest, stayed on the ranch. He loved the land and the horses with a quiet passion that reminded Willa of Warren. He was content with the simple rhythms of ranch life, and Warren began teaching him everything about the business, preparing him to take over someday. In 1895, Warren and Willa celebrated their 12th anniversary by taking a trip to Galveston, leaving the ranch in James's capable hands. It was the first time they had been away together, just the two of them, since before the children were born. They stayed in a hotel near the beach and walked along the shore in the evenings, and Willa felt like a young woman again, giddy and in love. "We should do this more often," she said, watching the waves roll in under a sky painted with sunset colors. "What, take holidays?" "No." "Well, yes, that too. But I meant just be together, the two of us. I love our children, I love the ranch, but sometimes I miss having you all to myself." Warren pulled her close. "I am always yours, Willa, children, ranch, and all. I know. But it is nice to remember what it was like before, when it was just us figuring things out together." They made love that night in their hotel room with the windows open to the salt breeze, and it was sweet and familiar and new all at once. Willa traced the scars on Warren's body, the marks of a life lived fully, and felt grateful for every moment that had brought them to this point. When they returned to Trinity, they found that James had not only managed the ranch perfectly, but had also started working on a new breeding program that showed real promise. Warren was so proud he could hardly speak, just clapped his son on the shoulder and nodded, but Willa saw the shine in his eyes. The turn of the century came with celebration and a bit of fear. People talked about what the new century would bring, whether it would be better or worse than the one just ending. Willa, now 40 years old and feeling every year of it, was just grateful to have made it this far. So many people she had known in her youth were gone, claimed by disease or accident or simple bad luck. But here she was, surrounded by family, with a husband she loved and a life she had built from the ashes of broken dreams. In 1902, William and Margaret had their first child, a daughter named Emma. Willa held her first grandchild and felt the weight of time settle on her shoulders. She was a grandmother now. The girl who had waited on that train platform was well and truly gone, replaced by this woman with silver threading through her hair and laugh lines around her eyes. But Warren still looked at her like she was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen, and that was all that really mattered. They settled into a comfortable rhythm as they aged. Warren's back bothered him some mornings, and Willa's hands ached with the beginnings of arthritis, but they worked around it. James ran most of the day-to-day operations of the ranch now, with Warren acting as advisor and elder statesman. Willa spent her time helping Catherine with the school, watching her grandchildren, and tending the garden she had cultivated over the years. One afternoon in 1905, as Willa was working in her garden, she heard the train whistle blow. It still ran through Trinity twice a week, though not as regularly as it had in the old days. She paused in her weeding and listened to the familiar sound, and for just a moment, she remembered what it had been like to wait. But then Warren came around the corner of the house, carrying a basket of vegetables from the root cellar, and the memory faded. She did not need to wait anymore. Everything she had been waiting for was right here. "What are you smiling about?" Warren asked, setting down the basket and dropping a kiss on top of her head. "Just thinking about how different my life turned out from what I planned. Better or worse, so much better. Better than I could have ever imagined." He helped her to her feet, and they stood together in the garden, surrounded by the evidence of the life they had built. The house Warren had expanded room by room, the barn where their horses lived, the corral where James was working with a young stallion, the distant figures of William and Margaret's children playing near the creek. "You remember what you said to me that first day on the train platform?" Willa asked. Warren thought for a moment. "I said a lot of things, most of them probably too forward for a stranger. You said I looked like someone who had been waiting a long time for something, and you hoped I would not wait forever. I remember, you looked like you wanted to slap me," Willa laughed. "I did a little, but you were right. I needed to hear that. I needed someone to see me clearly and tell me the truth." "And what truth was that?" "That waiting is not the same as living. That promises made in the past do not have to dictate the future. That sometimes the best thing you can do is let go of what you thought you wanted and reach for what is actually in front of you." She took his hands in hers. "You were right in front of me, Warren, and I am so glad I was brave enough to reach for you. You did not reach for me. You chose me." "There is a difference." He kissed her softly. "And you keep choosing me every day. That is what makes this work." They went inside together as the afternoon light began to fade, and Willa started preparing dinner while Warren set the table. It was such a simple, domestic scene, but it filled her with contentment. This was the life she had built. Not the one she had waited for, but the one she had chosen. Over the years that followed, they watched their children build their own lives and families. William and Margaret had 3 more children, and the portion of the ranch Warren had given them grew into a thriving operation. Catherine and her husband had twin boys who were as wild as their mother had been, and Trinity's school benefited from her passionate teaching. James married a quiet girl from town, a baker's daughter named Sarah, and they had 2 children who were already showing an aptitude for ranch work. Warren's health began to decline in 1910. Nothing dramatic, just a slow wearing down that comes with age and hard living. His back hurt more often, and he got tired easier. But his mind stayed sharp, and his love for Willa never wavered. On their 27th anniversary, he gave her a music box that played the same tune he used to play on his harmonica, the one he would play on the porch when she came back sad from the train station. "So you never forget that I saw you," he said, "even when you thought no one was looking." Willa cried, but they were good tears. Tears of gratitude for a life well lived and a love well earned. In the spring of 1912, Warren fell ill with pneumonia. The doctor did what he could, but Warren's body was worn out from years of hard work and hard living. Willa sat by his bedside day and night, holding his hand, talking to him about their life together, about the children and grandchildren, about all the moments big and small that had made up their years. "I do not regret a single day," Warren told her, his voice weak but clear. "Every moment with you has been a gift. Do not talk like you are leaving me," Willa said fiercely, though she could see the truth in his eyes. "You promised to show up every day. You cannot break that promise now." I have shown up every day I could, Willa, 30 years of days. That is more than most people get. He squeezed her hand with what little strength he had left. And I will find you again, wherever we go after this. I will find you waiting, and I will say, I am here now. He died the next morning as the sun was rising, with Willa holding his hand and their children gathered around the bed. It was peaceful as such things can be, but it tore a hole in Willa's heart that she knew would never fully heal. The funeral was held at the Trinity Church, and it seemed like the whole county came to pay their respects. Warren had been well liked and well respected, and people had stories to share about his kindness, his integrity, his skill with horses. Willa listened to them all, grateful for the evidence that Warren's life had mattered, that he had left a mark on the world beyond just the family they had built together. After the funeral, as people were leaving, Willa found herself back at the train platform. She did not know why she had walked there. Maybe it was habit. Maybe it was the need to feel close to Warren in the place where they had first really talked. Maybe it was just that her feet took her there without consulting her mind. She stood where she used to stand all those years ago, waiting for Thomas Garrett. But this time, she was not waiting. She was remembering the girl she had been, so convinced that her future could only look one way. Remembering Warren stepping off that train and seeing her, really seeing her, when everyone else just saw the crazy girl who could not let go. I am here now, he had said that day, not knowing he was offering her a different kind of promise. Not the promise of forever or grand dreams, but the promise of presence, of showing up, of choosing each other day after day after day, and he had kept that promise until the very end. Willa stood on the platform until the sun began to set, and then she walked back to the ranch that Warren had built, to the family they had raised, to the life they had created together. She was alone now in a way she had not been since 1883, but she was not lonely. Warren was in every corner of the ranch, in every horse in the corral, in every board of the house he had expanded and improved over the years. He was in their children's faces and their grandchildren's laughter. He was in the music box that played his song and the tools he had hung so carefully in the barn. He was not coming back this time, but he had been here, and that was enough. Willa lived for another 15 years, watching her grandchildren grow and her great-grandchildren be born. She taught them all about their grandfather, about the man who had seen a woman waiting on a train platform and decided she was worth knowing. She told them about patience and kindness, about the difference between waiting for life to happen and making life happen. James took over the ranch completely, and it continued to thrive under his steady leadership. William's operation grew even larger, and the Morrison name became synonymous with quality horses throughout Texas and beyond. Catherine's twin boys both became teachers like their mother, spreading her passion for education to a new generation. In the summer of 1927, Willa fell asleep in her rocking chair on the porch and did not wake up. She was 72 years old, and she died peacefully, surrounded by the life she and Warren had built. They buried her next to Warren in the Trinity Cemetery, and the whole town came to the funeral just as they had come to his. On her headstone, James had them carve a simple inscription. She waited for the wrong man and found the right one. Beloved wife, mother, grandmother. Years later, people would still tell the story of Willa Harrison and Warren Morrison, the woman who waited and the man who showed up. They would tell it to young people trying to decide between comfort and love, between plans and possibilities. They would tell it as a reminder that sometimes the best things in life are the ones we never planned for. And on quiet evenings, when the train would whistle through Trinity, people would think of Willa standing on that platform, waiting for a future that never came. They would think of Warren stepping off that train and seeing her, really seeing her. They would think of how one moment of connection, one decision to choose differently, can change the course of a whole life. The ranch still stands today, run by Warren and Willa's descendants, who breed horses and tell stories about the grandparents who started it all. And sometimes, on Tuesday and Friday evenings when the light is just right, people swear they can see two figures on the old train platform. A man and a woman, holding hands, looking at each other like they have all the time in the world. Maybe it is just a trick of the light. Maybe it is just small-town superstition. Or maybe it is the echo of a promise kept, a presence maintained, a love that showed up every day and never stopped showing up, even after death. Either way, it is a good story. The kind of story that reminds people what love really is. Not the dramatic promises or the grand gestures, but the steady choice to be there, day after day, through everything life throws at you. Willa Harrison had waited 3 years for a man who did not deserve her patience. But she had spent 30 years building a life with a man who did. And in the end, that made all the waiting worthwhile, because it led her to exactly where she needed to be. The lonely cowboy had said, "I am here now," and he had meant it. He had been there through joy and sorrow, through prosperity and struggle, through the birth of children and the death of dreams. He had been there when she needed him, and when she did not, simply because that was what love meant to him. And Willa, who had learned the hard way that waiting is not the same as living, had chosen him back every single day. She had built a life instead of dreaming about one. She had loved actively instead of passively. She had transformed from a woman defined by what she was waiting for into a woman defined by what she had created. That is the real story, not the sad girl on the platform or the man who never came back, but the woman who let go of the wrong dream and reached for the right one. The man who saw her worth when she could not see it herself. The life they built together, brick by brick, day by day, choice by choice. In Trinity, Texas, they still tell that story, and they always will.